So good morning to everyone. So today we are going to start a topic on icosanites. Just read out the case. A 60-year-old female patient presents to a clinic with recurrent epigastric abdominal pain for the last 3 months, and she reports some relief shortly after eating, but then the discomfort returns. She also feels tired and has to increase the amount of ibuprofen that is needed for relief of her arthritis. On general physical examination, the patient has mild epigastric tenderness. The laboratory investigation was sent and it revealed that the stool was positive for the occult blood, and the complete blood counts revealed presence of microcytic hypochromic anemia, which is maybe secondary to the iron deficiency. The patient was referred to a gastroenterologist who performed an upper GI endoscopy that identified that the patient must be suffering from gastric ulcers. So looking at this case, the gastroenterologist took a detailed history of the patient. He could get the history of intake of NSAIDs, that is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that are used in the treatment of severe joint pains, arthritis. He assumed that the causative agent of this gastric ulcer could be this, and he suggested that the patient should switch over the drug from ibuprofen to coxib such as celecoxib. Now looking at this case, first of all the patient has recurrent epigastric pain. Patient has taken NSAIDs for her joint pains or arthritis, and after that she says that after eating certain amount of food the symptoms get relieved, and after that again it starts. It means that the patient is definitely having some lesion in the gastrite, in the GI tract. So it was evident that the patient has gastric ulcer on endoscopy. Now let us look at the biochemical etiology of the disorder. So it is very clear-cut picture that the patient is taking anti-inflammatory drug called ibuprofen, which is a inhibitor of cyclooxygenase 1 and 2. This particular drug has got an action that is going to inhibit the cyclooxygenase pathway, which is going to hamper the production of prostaglandins, because these prostaglandins in gastrointestinal tract are very protective against the mucosal layer, which is going to be hampered with the help of this kind of drugs. So why do generally the coxibs have a lower incidence of upper GI problems than any other NSAIDs? Now looking at this picture, the coxibs are nothing but they are also COX inhibitors. We have two types of cyclooxygenase enzymes, COX1 and COX2. This COX2, they are not present in the gastrointestinal mucosa. Hence, the coxibs are the group of drugs which are going to inhibit only COX2 enzyme, which is not present in the gastric mucosa. Hence, there is enormous amount of production of prostaglandins, thus the gastric mucosa is going to be saved. So this is about today we are going to talk about the icosanites or prostaglandins in detail. So the chapter which is icosanites as a part of lipid metabolism, it's a very important pharmacologically, clinically as well. This icosanites, they are nothing but the 20 carbon containing compounds. Whenever we say 20 carbon containing compound, the thing that strikes in our mind is arachidonic acid, which is a polyunsaturated fatty acid which is containing 20 carbon atom. So these icosanites, icosa in the Greek word, it means that it is 20. It is derived from unsaturated fatty acids called arachidonic acid. Now the icosanites take two pathways, that is cyclooxygenase pathway and lipooxygenase pathway. By the cyclooxygenase pathway, they produce a certain group of compounds called as prostanoids, which are prostaglandins, prostacyclins and thromboxanes. The other group of chemicals that are produced by the lipooxygenase pathway are leukotrienes and lipoxanes. So moving on to in particular about the prostaglandins, this topic can be asked for 10 marks or 5 marks introduction. As the name indicates, the prostaglandins, they are derived from the prostate gland. Hence, it is called as prostaglandins because they were first time isolated from the prostate gland. But later they got to know that not only prostate gland, many other tissues like muscle, fat, bone tissue, blood cell, pancreas, nervous tissue, all of them are going to produce this prostaglandins in the required amount to the body. So looking at our scientist who has isolated this prostaglandins for the first time in 1935 was your own Von Euler, who received a Nobel Prize for the same, and Bengt Samuelson was another scientist who described the pathway of the prostaglandin synthesis. And the other scientist, John Vane, he was the person who described the mechanism of action of the aspirin with respect to the inhibitor of COX. That is, the COX enzyme is a suicide inhibitor. Moving on to the introduction about some of the other points about the introduction of prostaglandins. They are potent biologically active compounds which have got a diverse physiological and as well as pharmacological effects, hence they are called as local hormones. Once we say they are biologically potent, that means at a very low concentration, suppose at a concentration of 1 nanogram per ml, they are still able to cause smooth muscle contraction. This is the beauty of this prostaglandins, that they are very potent biological substances. Now coming to the definition, they are the compounds which are derived from the unsaturated 20 carbon containing fatty acids called arachidonic acid via the cyclooxygenase pathway, and they belong to icosanoid group of compounds. All of the naturally occurring prostaglandins, they have a alpha oriented hydroxyl groups located at 15th carbon atom. This is a peculiar feature about the prostaglandins. Most of the naturally occurring prostaglandins have got an alpha oriented hydroxyl group. Now, how do we justify our statement? Looking at the structure, in short we will describe about the structure. So the nomenclature of prostaglandins, they are represented as PG. That stands for prostaglandin. And once we say it is a prostaglandin, it is abbreviated as PG. Now there is a group of the class. The capital letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H and I, they indicate a class. That means, what does PGA mean? What does PGB mean? It means that it denotes the attachment of subsequent or the substitute groups that are located to the cyclopentane ring. I will be explaining in the next slide. And they contain something called subscript in the numerical form 1, 2, 3, which will represent number of double bonds. That means if it is subscript 1 means the prostaglandin contains 1 double bond. If it is 2, it contains 2 double bonds. If it is 3, it contains 3 double bonds. Now coming to the Greek letter alpha and beta, it's going to describe about the hydroxyl group orientation at the 15th carbon atom in prostaglandins. So if the hydroxyl group is present below the plane of the ring, we call it as alpha orientation. If it is projected above the plane of ring, we call it as beta orientation. Most of the naturally occurring prostaglandins are alpha oriented. Example, if you read an example for prostaglandin PGE2, PGF2 alpha, that means PGE2 means PG belonging to E class and it contains 2 double bonds. And PGF2 alpha, it means it is a prostaglandin belonging to F class and contains 2 double bonds and the hydroxyl group is alpha oriented. That's why it is represented as PGF2 alpha. So these are the 5 prostaglandins that are widely distributed in the body, bringing out diverse physiological functions like PGE1, PGE2, PGF2, PGI2 and thromboxane A2. These are very, very important physiologically. Coming to the, look at the structure. Suppose if we call a prostaglandin, I told you all the naturally occurring prostaglandins, they are derived from prostanoic acid and they all contain something called hydroxyl group at 15th carbon atom and they do have a double bond between 13th carbon atom and 14th carbon atom. This is a general structure and they do have something called cyclopentane ring. So it is a general structure, but how does the PG series differ from each other? That's a question. Now coming to the PGE series, if you look at this diagram, then all naturally occurring, they have got hydroxyl group at 15 carbon atom and they have got double bond at 13 and 14 carbon atom. But what has happened to the cyclopentane ring? When you look at the 9th carbon atom, there's a ketone group that is attached and at the 11th carbon atom, there's a hydroxyl group attached. You compare with the PGF, that is F series. In F series, all the structure remains to be same as compared to PGE1, but it differs at the 9th carbon atom. You can look at the 9th carbon atom, it has got a hydroxyl group instead of ketone group. Similarly for PGA, that is prostaglandin A series, when you look at this prostaglandin A series, it has got a 2 double bonds, that means it belongs to PGA2 series, and this has got a ketone group at 9th carbon atom and additional double bond between 10th and 11th carbon atom. So this is about the nomenclature and the structure of prostaglandins. Now coming to the different classification and types. Depending upon the number of double bonds, they are classified into series 1, series 2 and series 3. Series 1, as the name indicates, contains one double bond at carbon 13 and 14, as I showed you in the general structure. This double bond is trans in nature. What do you mean by trans fatty acid? If the functional groups are present to the opposite side of the double bond, we call it as a trans. Cis fatty acids mean they should be present on the same side of the double bond. In case of series 2, what has happened? The double bond is present between 13 and 14, which is trans in nature, or the other one is present between carbon 5 and 6, which is cis in nature. Compared to the series 3, it has got a 3 double bonds, one between 13, 14, 5, 6 and 17, 18. Now coming to the types. We have a different types: PGE series, F series, PG endoperoxides and others. PGE series, we have PGE1, E2, E3. PGF series, we have 1, 2, 3, and PG endoperoxides, we have PGG and PGH. The others include prostaglandin A, B, C, D, but out of all this, the most significant ones are PGE and PGF. So these are the various structures of all these molecules. We need not learn, but for the knowledge sake, we must know this. Coming to the metabolism of prostaglandins. Again, when we say metabolism, it deals with both anabolic pathway as well as catabolic pathway. That means how does these prostaglandins are synthesized and how they get catabolized, that is broken down. Coming to the biosynthesis of prostaglandins. They are first of all not stored in the cell. They are synthesized by most of the tissues, as I showed you in the previous slides. The site is cytosol. The substrate that is required for the synthesis of prostaglandins are fatty acid precursors. Let it be arachidonic acid, let it be linolenic acid, any polyunsaturated fatty acid. But the most common precursor is arachidonic acid for the most of the eicosanoids. Coming to the enzyme, it has got a multi-enzyme complex and it is strictly aerobic pathway. It do requires oxygen, and approximately the literature says that 1 milligram of prostaglandins are synthesized every day. Coming to the biosynthesis series, I said you that they are classified into 3 different series: series 1, series 2, series 3. So the different series require different fatty acid precursor. Series 1 requires eicosa trienoic acid. Eicosa means 20, tri means containing 3 double bonds, enoic means it is a unsaturated fatty acids. You can look at the double bond position at 8, 11 and 14. Series 2, they are derived, or the fatty acid precursor required for series 2 is arachidonic acid, which has got 20 carbon atom and 4 double bonds, one at 5, 8, 11 and 14. Series 3 do require eicosa pentaenoic acid. 20 plus 5, that is 5 is your 5 double bonds and it is an unsaturated fatty acid. So please do remember about this particular slide, because series 2 is very important. I said you PGE2, PGF2 alpha, they have a wide pharmacological physiological action. They are very important in our clinical practice as well. That's the reason the most common fatty acid precursor arachidonic acid is studied for the pathway. Then coming to the, so you can look at this picture, which will say that this is a 3 double bond containing compound, that is eicosa trienoic acid, which is going to give rise to PG1 series. And when you look at this particular molecule, that is arachidonic acid, it has got 4 double bonds. It gives rise to a compound containing 2 double bonds, that is PG2 series. And when you look at this compound, it has got 5 double bonds, that is eicosa pentaenoic acid. It gives rise to 3 series, that is 3 double bond containing series. Now moving on to the actual biosynthesis. I said you that the enzyme that is responsible for the synthesis of prostaglandins do occur in multi-enzyme complex. Now, what is this multi-enzyme complex? We have many multi-enzyme complexes. For example, we have pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex, fatty acid synthase complex in carbohydrates, and similarly we have something called multi-enzyme complex. The name is prostaglandin H synthase, that is PGHS, which has got two isoenzymes PGHS1 and PGHS2. Now, why do we call this enzyme as a bifunctional enzyme? Because it has got two activities. One is cyclooxygenase activity, the other one is peroxidase activity. We all have studied about electron transport chain and the enzymes that are required for the biological oxidation. So the peroxidase enzymes are the group of enzymes which do belong to hydroperoxidases group. What does they do? They will break down the hydrogen peroxide that is produced in the cell. The other group of enzyme is cyclooxygenase enzyme. The name itself shows that it has got a capacity to introduce the oxygen atom into the substrate molecule to give rise to the product. We have already studied about monooxygenases and dioxygenases. Monooxygenases are going to incorporate one single oxygen atom into the substrate, whereas dioxygenases are going to incorporate both molecules of oxygen into the substrate. Similarly, the cyclooxygenase enzyme is going to incorporate two molecules of oxygen into the substrate to give rise to the product. Now, the biosynthesis of prostaglandins are mainly consist of three steps. Now, what is the biosynthetic pathway differs from other pathways? Let us see. The step 1, I said you that it requires arachidonic acid. Now, in a cell where this arachidonic acid is present, it is not present as such, but it is present in the form of phospholipids. Now, Singer and Nicholson in 1932 already described about the structure of the cell membrane. It contains bilayered phospholipid layer. Now, this arachidonic acid is a component of phospholipids. Now, how are we going to get this arachidonic acid from the phospholipid? That is the first step. The enzyme that plays an important role in the release of arachidonic acid from the phospholipid is your phospholipase A2. Now, when we remember this enzyme phospholipase A2, already we have discussed in the chemistry of lipids and hydrolysis of phospholipids that phospholipase A2, which acts on phosphatidylcholine to release lysolecithin and fatty acid. I already told you that the phospholipase A2, it is present in the viper snake, which is going to account for the severe hemolysis and renal failure in a patient presenting with the viper snake bite poisoning. And the cofactor that is required for this particular step is your calcium, and it's a rate limiting reaction. Now let us see how this is going to be released. Look at the structure of the membrane. It's a bilayered phospholipid. This phospholipid is acted upon by an enzyme called phospholipase A2. This phospholipase A2 causes the cleavage of this phospholipids, thus releasing something called arachidonic acid, which is the commonest precursor for PG2 series. Now, the further steps we are going to discuss in the next slide. So, this is just to show the diagram about the action of phospholipase A2. It acts at this position. This is a structure of phosphatidylcholine, and this phospholipase A2 attacks at this position, and it's going to release something called lysolecithin molecule and the fatty acid molecule. Now, the first step is, I said you, the phospholipids from the cell membrane. It can be present, some amount of arachidonic acid can also be taken from the diet, and the phospholipid present in the cell membrane is acted upon by phospholipase A2. It's going to release something called arachidonic acid. Now, who is going to say that the phospholipase A2 to be active? There should be some stimulus. Who is going to say that the phospholipase A2 has to be released now and it's a time for arachidonic acid production? The stimulants are angiotensin 2, all the inflammatory mediators like angiotensin 2, bradykinin, vasopressin, thrombin, trauma, hypoxia, epinephrine. These are all the stimulants going to stimulate the phospholipase A2 to release the arachidonic acid. This arachidonic acid further required for the production of the prostaglandins. Whenever we sustain any injury, we feel pain, right? We do get pain when we meet a road traffic accident or some injury. So we always feel pain. This pain is mediated by the release of this arachidonic acid. In turn, the prostaglandin production, which are going to account for the production of pain. Now, the second step is, once the arachidonic acid is released, what is the fate of this arachidonic acid? The second step, it undergoes oxidation and cyclization to form cyclic endoperoxides. This particular step is very, very important because this particular step requires the participation of molecular oxygen. I said you that it is a multi-enzyme complex. Prostaglandin G synthase, it is a multi-enzyme complex. It is a bifunctional enzyme having cyclooxygenase activity as well as peroxidase activity. Now the cyclooxygenase activity of this enzyme accounts for this particular step. It requires molecular oxygen. GSH stands for reduced glutathione, and it requires tetrahydrobiopterin. When you read about the vitamin metabolism, especially B complex, then you will understand what is this. Then it requires participation of heme molecule as well. All these requirements, when it is fulfilled with the help of cyclooxygenase, it do produces something called cyclic endoperoxides. Now, this particular step has got an inhibitory effect by glucocorticoids and aspirin, indomethacin, brufen and other NSAIDs. Normally we call it as a painkillers. How do they act? These are all painkillers that are used in the management of the pain, and these are the group of drugs called corticosteroids which are going to stop the inflammation process. How are these drugs going to act? This is by blocking this enzyme called cyclooxygenase part of PGHS, that stands for prostaglandin H synthase. So this, by blocking this enzyme, they are going to stop the production of prostaglandins. Thus, they are going to relieve the pain and they were going to stop the inflammation process. Now coming to the step 3. I said you, in step 3, the endoperoxides, in the product of step 2 is endoperoxides. What do you mean by endoperoxides? Because they do contain a peroxide molecule. That's the reason, because they are produced inside the cell, they are endo and they are peroxides because they contain the peroxides which are the free radicals again. So the first endoperoxide or the first prostaglandin that's going to be synthesized is PGG2. How do we remember? It is PGG2. PG contains prostaglandin P capital G capital, the G. So the prostaglandin contains G, and the G variety is the first prostaglandin that's going to be produced. This PGG2. I told you the 2 series requires arachidonic acid, henceforth we are showing everything in 2 series. The PGG2, upon action by the peroxidase enzyme, which is going to destroy the free radicals, that is hydrogen peroxide, it's going to give rise to PGH2. Okay. What's the important peculiar character of these 2 molecules? ये दोनों कंपाउंड्स बहुत अनस्टेबल रहेगा. जब भी प्रोडक्शन होगा, whenever they get produced, PGG2 and PGH2, immediately it's going to be converted into other prostaglandins because they are unstable molecules. Upon again peroxidase system, they give rise to PGF2 alpha and PGE2. Now what happens to PGE2? PGE2, upon dehydrogenation and presence of isomerase, they do get converted into other classes like PGA2, PGB2, PGC2. Now this is the third step. For the first step, we discussed about release of arachidonic acid from the phospholipids with the help of phospholipase A2. Second step, we said that the cyclooxygenase enzyme is acted upon to the arachidonic acid, and it is going to produce something called endoperoxidases, for which it requires, I said you, it requires molecular oxygen, it requires a participation of reduced glutathione, it requires a participation of heme and tetrahydrobiopterin as a cofactor. So once the endoperoxides are formed, what is the fate of this endoperoxidase? These endoperoxides are acted upon by an enzyme called peroxidase, which is going to give rise to production of PGG2 and PGH2, which are highly unstable prostaglandins, which further gets converted into PGF2 alpha, PGE2, and further A, B and C classes are produced. Now coming to the, I said you the prostanoids are nothing but number 1 prostaglandins, number 2 prostacyclins, and number 3 thromboxanes. Now so far we have discussed about the prostaglandins. Now what are these prostacyclins, how they are produced? They are all synthesized via cyclooxygenase pathway only. Now, similar step as similar to that of prostaglandins, the arachidonic acid is released from the cell membrane and it gets converted into PGG2 and PGH2. The step differs at this point. Here the PGH2 give rise to PGF2 alpha and PGE2 and ABC series, but here in case of prostacyclins, with the help of an enzyme called prostacyclin synthase. This is an enzyme which is helpful in the formation of prostacyclins. Again, what is the difference between synthetase and synthase? Or I used to repeat this particular aspect many times. The synthases does not require ATP, whereas synthetases do require ATP during the reaction. So thus the PGH2 gets converted to prostacyclins with the help of an enzyme called prostacyclin synthase. Now these prostacyclins are ready to execute their actions by increasing the concentration of cyclic AMP, and they do also inhibit platelet aggregation. This we are going to discuss in the biological actions further. Now coming to the thromboxane. I said you all these three are prostanoids. Now how these thromboxanes are synthesized apart from prostaglandins and prostacyclins? The steps are similar up to the production of PGH2, but it differs at this step. Unlike in case of prostaglandin synthesis, here the step is little bit different, that is it requires an enzyme called thromboxane synthase like that of prostacyclin synthase. It leads to the production of thromboxane. Especially it plays an important role in the platelets and thus accounting for vasoconstriction as well as aggregation of the platelets. So now this is about the biosynthesis of prostaglandin, prostacyclin and thromboxanes. Now let us move on to the summary of this entire synthesis. The membrane bound phospholipids, they are acted upon by phospholipase, going to release arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid via cyclooxygenase produces PGG2. Via peroxidase it produces PGH2. The fate differs here. With the help of thromboxane synthase it produces thromboxanes. With the help of prostacyclin synthase it produces prostacyclins. With the help of series of isomerases it produces PGD2, E2 and F2. First is G, H, then D, E, F. What are these prostaglandins? What is the mechanism of action of these prostaglandins? There is something called adenylyl cyclase enzyme. Now, what is the function of this adenylyl cyclase? This causes hydrolysis of ATP to resist something called cyclic AMP is going to act as a second messenger for this particular local hormones to mediate the biological effects. Now, this about the summary already discussed. And coming to the degradation of this prostaglandins. The degradation of this prostaglandins is very fast in tissues like liver and lung, and the half-life of this prostaglandins is only about 30 seconds. The important enzymes that do play an important role in the degradation of prostaglandins are 15-hydroxy-PG dehydrogenase and delta 13-PG reductase. When you look at the diagram here, suppose if we take an example of prostaglandin E2. E2 means it is belonging to 2 series, that is it has got 2 double bonds. This is evident in the figure. This is acted upon by 15-hydroxyl prostaglandin dehydrogenase. Once we say dehydrogenase, it should remove the hydrogen atom. Exactly that is what is happening here. At the 15th carbon atom, if you look at PGE2, there is a hydroxyl group. Upon dehydrogenation, removal of this hydrogen atom, it becomes ketonic group. So the compound name is 15-keto PGE2. Here it was hydroxyl PGDH was acting on this molecule, converting PGE2 into 15-keto PGE2. Why we do call it as 15-keto? Because at the 15th carbon atom, there is an introduction of keto group into the molecule. Now the second enzyme which is going to act here will be delta 13 prostaglandin reductase. So reductase is a group of enzymes which carry out the dehydrogenation and oxidation reactions. So thus it gives SDA product called 13-14 dihydro 15-keto PGE2. That means at the 13 and 14 dihydro, there are 2 hydrogen atoms attached at the 13 and 14th carbon atom, and remaining 15th position there is already keto group, because they are reducing these compounds are undergoing reduction at 13 and 14 carbon atom. That's the reason the compound is called as 13, 14 dihydro15 keto PgE2. So this is the product, and this is going to undergo further. The fate of this molecule is that it undergoes series of beta oxidation, and as similar to that of beta oxidation that we have studied in the earlier classes. Similar to that, it undergoes beta oxidation, and further it undergoes omega hydroxylation and resulting in various products. Till here, if you know, that is more than sufficient. These two enzymes are very important. That is your 15 hydroxyl prostaglandin dehydrogenase and delta 13 prostaglandin reductase. These are the two important enzymes with respect to the catabolism of prostaglandins. Now coming to the mechanism of action on the various tissues. How does these hormones, the local hormones called prostaglandins, do act? So there's something called G protein coupled receptors which are located on the cell membrane. This G coupled protein receptors, whenever the hormone binds to this, it gets activated. The G protein coupled receptors get activated. What is the next fate of this G protein coupled receptor? Once they get activated, they are going to stimulate an enzyme called adenylyl cyclase, which is also located in the membrane. And this adenylyl cyclase, as I said you in the previous slide, it's going to convert ATP into cyclic AMP, which is a secondary messenger. So this is how the prostaglandins do act. They will directly not enter into the cell, but they do stimulate something called G protein coupled receptors, which are going to in turn stimulate this adenylyl cyclase, and this adenylyl cyclase brings about the hydrolysis of ATP to cyclic AMP. This cyclic AMP is going to act as a secondary messenger. Now let us look at the various biological actions depending upon the tissues. When we look at the cardiovascular system, most of the prostaglandins, they do act as hypertensives, antihypertensive. Once we say antihypertensive, they must be causing reduction in the blood pressure. The mechanism is via vasodilatation. Which are those PGs which are going to cause reduction in the blood pressure? That is PGE2, PGI2 and PGF2. These are the three important prostaglandins which are going to bring about reduction in the blood pressure. Now another important function of this PGI2 is that it inhibits platelet aggregation. Now how do we remember? PGI2 contains I for inhibition of platelet aggregation. Now there are some sort of prostaglandins which are going to execute the biphasic reactions, and they are weak ionotropes, like we have unstable endoperoxides like prostaglandin G and prostaglandin H. Now we know about the prostaglandin. Now what is the exact action of thromboxane A2? It has got opposite action that compared to prostaglandin and prostacyclin. What is that action? They all bring about vasodilatation, but thromboxane A2 does bring about vasoconstriction. Thus it's going to elevate the blood pressure and it's going to promote the platelet aggregation. So the balance between these two is very, very important for the cell to function in a proper way. Now let us look at the important differences between prostacyclin, that is PGI2, and thromboxane A2. We know that all the prostaglandin cyclin, they contain cyclopentane ring, whereas thromboxane contain oxane ring. And the site of formation, prostacyclins are formed in the endothelium, and thromboxane, as the name itself indicates, it is produced in the thrombocytes, that is platelets. Cyclic AMP levels are going to be increased. I said you that the mechanism of action of this prostaglandin is via adenylyl cyclase, thus bringing about increase in the cyclic AMP levels. Whereas thromboxane A2, it's going to decrease the exact opposite effects. And the blood vessels, they cause vasodilatation, whereas thromboxane A2 causes vasoconstriction. And with respect to the bronchial system, that is bronchial smooth muscles, it has got a relaxation capacity, that is PGI2, and exact opposite action with that of thromboxane A2. Thus, if we look at the prostacyclin, the bronchial asthma may not be a complication because they cause a relaxation of bronchial muscles, whereas thromboxane A2 is going to be dangerous in these patients. Now coming to the respiratory system, we already discussed about the cardiovascular. Now moving on to the respiratory system, the important prostaglandin F series is going to cause bronchoconstriction. Now one has to be very careful while giving this particular analogs in a patient presenting with the bronchial asthma. It has to be avoided because it causes bronchoconstriction. Similarly, we have another drug called PGE. These analogs can be given in bronchial asthma patients since they do not cause bronchoconstriction but they do cause bronchodilator. These are the commonly used drug for the treatment of bronchial asthma in the form of aerosol sprays for relieving the bronchospasm. Now coming to the what's the effect on gastrointestinal system. Now the effect on GI system can be studied in the three different varieties. On the gastric mucosa, what is the effect? On the pancreas, what is the effect? And on the small intestine, what is the effect? Now the mechanism of action is quite different here. In case of gastric, that is in case of stomach, it's going to inhibit the gastric secretion. The prostaglandins are going to inhibit the gastric secretion, but they are going to increase the secretions in case of pancreas as well as in the intestine. Exact opposite action to each other. Now, and in the intestine, they do increase the water and electrolyte and mucus secretion. So can we use these drugs in treating the patient suffering from acid peptic disorder, that is APD, or gastric ulcers? Yes. Why? Because they are going to inhibit the gastric secretion, since in these patients there is excessive production of gastric acid, that is HCl. So it's going to damage the gastric mucosa and it's going to be more dangerous in a patient suffering from this. So in these patients, if we can give these kind of analogs, definitely the gastric secretion is going to be hampered, or it's going to inhibit the gastric secretion. That is has got a protective action against the formation of gastric ulcers. So since they increase the intestinal motility, the movement in the intestine, one of the most commonly that we come across the side effect will be diarrhea. Now coming to the reproductive system, what is the effect on ovary and uterus? Now this is a very important aspect because the therapeutic application of prostaglandins mainly lies in this system, that's reproductive system. This is very important in case of causing the contraction of the uterine smooth muscle, especially the drugs like PGE1, PGE2 and PGF2 alpha. When we given the drug intravenously, they do cause something called uterine smooth muscle contraction, and the response of these drugs is very much prompt and it is in a dose dependent manner. So they are generally employed during medical termination of pregnancy and for the induction of the labor. If sometimes there is a delay in the labor in the patients who have crossed expected date of delivery, during that time it is essential to induce the labor. So the induction of labor is favorable with the prostaglandins and arresting the postpartum hemorrhage, since they cause the contraction of the smooth muscles and the vasculature of the arteries or the veins that are supplying the uterus. Since they cause the constriction of this, so they can arrest the bleeding. And some of them can also be used for a patient suffering from infertility, especially the female infertility, because they do have some effect on ovulation, because some of them are going to be used for the LH induced ovulation. Some of the prostaglandins are going to cause LH induced, but by stimulating the production of luteinizing hormone, they do bring about ovulation, can be employed in the treatment of infertility. Now look at this diagram. The estrogen released from the ovary and oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary of the mother as well as from the fetus. What's going to do? It's going to stimulate the uterus and it's going to stimulate placenta. Uterus action is independent and the placental action is independent. It has its own way. Placenta do stimulates the production of prostaglandins. Thus, it brings about the more and more contraction of the uterus. As such, oxytocin is also causing uterine contractions. The other mechanism which is executed by your placenta is via the production of prostaglandins. Thus, they bring about more and more uterine contractions, which will ease out the labor. That is induction of the labor, so that the delivery of the baby can be easier. The very prerequisite for the delivery of the baby or the induction of labor, which you are going to study of course in the final year examination, but at this juncture you should be knowing what is the application of this prostaglandins therapeutically. So they can be used for cervical ripening. Dilatation of the cervix and the cervical ripening is a prerequisite for the induction of the labor. How does it happen? When we give intra cervical prostaglandins, what does they do? They do cause something called, they will increase the vascular permeability, thus they cause dilatation of the vessels, and they do also bring about some sort of inflammation. I so told you that the prostaglandins do mediate inflammation. Again, in the further slide we're going to discuss. This neutrophils undergo degranulation. This degranulation is going to release collagenase and elastase enzyme. Now, anatomy of the cervix, you must be already aware of it. The cervix is made up of collagen tissue, smooth muscle tissue, and some sort of glycosaminoglycans like dermatan sulfate, heparan sulfate. Now the cervix ripening is very important. Now for the cervix ripening, it is important for the degradation of collagen that is present in the cervical tissue. How does this happen? For the degradation of collagen, it do requires an enzyme called collagenase. This collagenase, it is released from the neutrophils upon degranulation. Thus, it is going to hydrolyze the collagen. Thus, it is going to allow the cervix to be more flexible, and it's going to allow the cervix to dilate. Thus, it helps in the induction of labor. Anyway, further details you will be studying in the OBG. At this juncture, please know that they play an important role in cervical ripening. Now coming to the renal system, it's very, very important. In case of renal system, what does they do? This prostaglandins, first of all, they are going to increase the renal plasma flow. Once there is an increased blood circulation to the particular organ, the organ functions more effectively. So there is a more what is the function of kidney? The production of GFR. So there is a increase in the GFR, of course urine flow. That is why we call it as diuresis. Diuresis means increased urine flow. Now we are already aware of what is polyuria. Polyuria means greater than 2 liters per day. We already studied in abnormal urine. Similarly here there is an increased urine flow. We call it as diuresis. Now along with increase the urine flow, the other two important electrolytes are also going to be excreted more. Which are those? They are sodium and potassium. Increased excretion of sodium in the urine, the terminology we use called natriuresis. Similarly for excretion of potassium, we call it as kaliuresis. And on the distal tubules of the nephron, they do act, and they cause the inhibition of chloride reabsorption. The very important factor about this particular prostaglandin, especially PGE, is that it is going to inhibit antidiuretic hormone. Now, what is the function of antidiuretic hormone? We know that it is secreted from the posterior pituitary. It is called vasopressin. It is going to help in the reabsorption of water. Now, there is an opposition to this action. The prostaglandins are going to inhibit this antidiuretic hormone. So, generally, what is going to happen? The water reabsorption will not be there. Hence, there is a excretion of more and more water, or the urine flow, accounting for your diuresis. The other important function or the action of this PGE is that it's going to cause release of renin from the JG cells of juxtaglomeralar apparatus of the kidney. So this is about the effect on the renal system. Coming to the immunity and inflammation. We all know that whenever we sustain any injury, we feel pain. This pain is mediated by the inflammation. How does this inflammation happen? First of all, the smaller capillaries that are present, they are going to be highly permeable. That means the prostaglandins are going to increase the capillary permeability, and once they do this, there is a infiltration of the inflammatory cells into the site of injury. Then the patient feels very painful. That is called hyperalgesia. Now, and also they do inhibit T cell proliferation and cytokine production. Now coming to the other important effect on central nervous system, I told you that they are the substances which are going to cause pain, they are going to cause fever because of the inflammation. So there's a release of neurotransmitters, and they cause change in the behavior, and they will sensitize pain stimulus, and they do cause something called pyrogenic. Because of the mediation of this inflammation, they are going to release the pyrogenic substances, and they cause the shoot up in the body temperature. Now coming to the endocrine system, when we look at the endocrine system, it has got a very important action, because the anterior pituitary, it's going to stimulate this anterior pituitary. They were going to help in the release of hormones like TSH, insulin, and steroid hormones. Coming to the metabolism, once we say insulin, so it will have effect on your carbohydrate metabolism. It has got an effect on lipid metabolism. It is an anti-lipogenic hormone. Thus, what will happen? Insulin-like action on the carbohydrate means it will promote the utilization of more and more glucose via glycolysis. It promotes it is going to inhibit gluconeogenesis, and it's going to promote glycogen synthesis. So this is some of the actions of insulin that we already know from the carbohydrate metabolism. And they do have something called, they do execute a action like parathyroid hormone, which is going to release the calcium into the blood by a process called demineralization. And these are also anti-lipolytic, because they are lipogenic. I said you that insulin helps in fatty acid synthesis. That means they are lipogenic, they are not lipolytic. Now coming to the commercially available prostaglandins, or therapeutically available prostaglandins, which we call it as analogs, are PGE1 analogs are alprostadil, rioprostadil, misoprostol, which is commonly used drug, gemiprost, and PGE2 dinoprostone, N-prostil, dinoprost, and PGF2 alpha, we have carboprost, latanoprost, and travoprost. Let us move on to the therapeutic applications, why they are used therapeutically more often, but the literature also says that they have a very short duration of action, and they do, the clinical usage is limited, but still without them it is difficult to manage certain things. Shorter duration action, and because they do not have a tissue specificity. The other problem that is encountered with the prostaglandins is that they lack tissue specificity, because most of the tissues are synthesizing them. Number two, they have got a very short half-life. I said you they got only 30 seconds of half-life. That's two important limitations, because of which they are unable to be used widely. But still, in some diseases, they are still used. In carrying out abortion in first and second trimester, PGE2 and PGF2 alpha can be given intravenous and intramuscularly, and along with mifepristone in case of first trimester. And it also, I said you in the previous slides, they are helpful in the induction of the labor for causing cervical ripening. It's about the dose of this tablet is PGE2 at a dose of 500 UG gel. It can be given intracervically, and 1 to 2 milligram tablet can be given in the posterior fornix, and it can be given in the form of pace race, which is about 3 milligrams. I said you that since they are gastric mucosa protective, they could be used for treating the ulcers. And they are vasodilators. I said you that most of the prostaglandins belonging to E2 series, F2 series, they are vasodilators. The example is alprostadil. This vasodilatation action has got two important therapeutic application. In case of patent ductus arteriosus, so you must have already studied in anatomy, going to be studying in medicine as well. This PDA is nothing but this abnormal connection between the pulmonary artery and the aorta before the birth of the baby. Normally it has to close after 2 to 3 days of the birth, but if it remains open, or if it remains patent, if the baby develops symptoms, it has to be closed surgically. Before it requires surgery, another drug called indomethacin or ibuprofen can be employed for the partial or symptomatic management of this PDA. But it is essential to maintain PDA as such till the surgical approach. Then since it increases the blood flow to the urethra and pineal gland, it is highly useful in the patient suffering from the erectile dysfunction. Now coming to the another important application is glaucoma. What do you mean by glaucoma? It is nothing but rise in the intraocular pressure because of the obstruction to the flow of aqueous. Especially this latanoprost drug, it's going to be employed in the treatment of open angle glaucoma because it's going to promote the uveoscleral outflow of this aqueous humor. Coming to the cyclooxygenase enzymes, there are two isoforms of cyclooxygenases, COX-1 and COX-2. The important differences between these two should be known because most of the pharmacological actions and the physiological actions are dependent upon the location of this enzyme. COX-1, it is constitutive. बंद हो गया क्या okay. COX-1, it is present in most of the tissues. It is a ubiquitous constitutive. It is present all the time irrespective of the physiological stimulus. Whereas COX-2, it is inducible. It is going to be synthesized only when there is a stimulus, any inflammation, trauma, such kind of things. The range of expression, it is present at 2 to 3 fold COX-1, whereas that is COX-2 is present at 10 to 80 fold. Now coming to the cellular location of COX-1, most of the tissues are having COX-1 like pancreas, stomach, kidney, endothelium. COX-2 is very much limited to the macrophages because the stimulants are cytokines and inflammatory mediators. Now coming to the steroid drugs, which are going to be effectively inhibit the expression of COX-2. That is why they are going to be given in a patient suffering from severe inflammation, joint pains, in order to inhibit the COX-2 enzyme, which brings about more and more inflammation. And steroids have no effect on the COX-1 enzyme. Now, what is the benefit of presence of this COX-1? I said to you, in gastric mucosa, presence of COX-1 will give rise to prostaglandins, which is going to protect the gastric mucosa, and they do also play an important role in regulation of gastric acid secretion and maintaining the normal function of the kidney. In case of COX-2, they are mainly involved in the synthesis of prostaglandins because they are pain causers, inflammation causers, they are painful substances, the COX-2. Now the COX inhibitors, the drugs which are going to act by inhibiting the COX enzymes. I told you the first slide of my presentation was the case history, which was the doctor was advising the patient to take COX-SIPs instead of ibuprofen. Now the differences lies here. The non-selective COX inhibitors are aspirin, ibuprofen, indomethacin, nimesulide and meloxicam because they are going to inhibit both COX-1 and COX-2. They do not care whether it is COX-1, COX-2. They have inhibitory effect on both. That's why the gastric mucosa gets damaged with this. The selective COX-2, they are very selective. They are going to inhibit COX-2 enzyme present in the macrophages only. Now, which are those group of drugs? They are celecoxib, rofecoxib, valdecoxib. Now, just for the completion's sake, let us know what is the action of this aspirin. This aspirin is going to inhibit cyclooxygenase because aspirin is a very commonly used drug by most of the people who have crossed 40 years of age, suffering at risk of diabetes, hypertension, cardiac injury or heart diseases. They are at the prophylaxis of aspirin. So this aspirin is going to cause inhibition of this cyclooxygenase enzyme, which is also called as PGH2 synthase. The aspirin going to bind to this enzyme and it's going to cause inactivation of this particular enzyme and the salicylic acid gets removed. Now coming to the other two substances that we need to discuss by lipooxygenase pathway are leukotrienes and lipoxins. Now the second important molecules that are synthesized by the lipooxygenase pathway are leukotrienes. Leuko means they are present in the leukocytes. And the pathway of this leukotriene synthesis is, I told you, cyclooxygenase system gives rise to prostanoids and the lipooxygenase system gives rise to leukotrienes and lipoxins. This leukotrienes, again the precursor is your arachidonic acid, which is a polyunsaturated fatty acid. The release of this arachidonic acid is the initial step in any kind of eicosanoids. This arachidonic acid is released from the phospholipids with the help of an enzyme called phospholipase A2. Now, what is happening to the fate of this arachidonic acid in this pathway? It is acted upon by the lipooxygenase. I told you any oxygenase for that matter, it is going to incorporate oxygen atom into the substrate. Here also both the oxygen molecules are going to incorporated into the arachidonic acid. Thus it gives rise to a compound called hydroperoxy icosa tetraenoic acid. Hydroperoxy icosa. Icosa means 20. Tetra means 4 double bonds it contains. Enoic acid means it is a polyunsaturated fatty acid. So it contains a hydroperoxy molecule, which is a free radical molecule. Now this is the precursor for your both leukotrienes as well as lipoxygens. Now this 5-HPETE, it releases a molecule of water. It forms something called allylic epoxide called LTF. Directly we got the leukotriene A4 series. Again A4 series is nothing but A means it is a class of leukotriene depending upon the substituent group, and 4 means it contains 4 double bonds. Now the first compound that is synthesized here in the leukotriene pathway is LTA4. It forms a labile allylic, it is an epoxide. There we saw endoperoxides. Here we are getting epoxide. It is LTA4. Now what will happen to LTA4? It gets converted upon with the help of an enzyme called hydrolase, which incorporates water molecule for the hydrolysis to carry out, and it's going to produce something called LTB4. Now what is the importance of this LTB4? It is a leukotriene which is going to be present in neutrophils. Now once we say it is present in neutrophils, it is going to bring about two actions, that is chemotaxis and chemokinesis. Whenever there is a site of inflammation, the cells are going to move towards the site, that we call it as chemokinesis. The attraction of these cells to the site, we call it a chemotactic. So these are the agents which are acting as chemotactic as well as chemokinesis agent, that is LTB4, which is synthesized in the neutrophil via this hydrolase and lipooxygenase pathway. Now coming to the other leukotrienes like leukotriene C, D and E. What will happen to them? Now the same molecule LTA4 with the addition of glutathione molecule, and with the help of an enzyme called glutathione S transferase, this addition of glutathione molecule here, it is going to transfer its group into the molecule and is going to synthesize something called LTC4, that is leukotriene C4 series. Upon release of this glutamate, I told you glutathione, it is a tripeptide. It is made up of gamma glutamyl glycine, right? So the glycine is also a component of glutathione and glutamate is also a component of glutathione. With the release of glutamate, it forms LTD4, that is leukotriene D4 series. And once there is a release of glycine molecule from the glutathione molecule which was incorporated into A4, it's going to produce something called LTE4, that is leukotriene E4. During this steps, it requires a participation of gamma glutamyl transpeptidase enzyme and cysteine glycine dipeptidase. Dipeptidase means it has to hydrolyze between the cysteine and glycine, because glutathione is a tripeptide. It is made up of cysteine, glutamate as well as glycine. Now at the first juncture, glutamate got released. Now there is a bond, the dipeptide bond, that is remaining between the cysteine and the glycine. Now it's going to break that. That's done by the cysteine and glycine dipeptidase. Thus it's going to release back the glycine. The cysteine still remains in the molecule, giving rise to leukotriene E4. Then already I told you the function of LTB4. I'm coming to the important function of LT, leukotriene C4, D4 and E4. These three together we call it as SRA, that is slow reactive substances of anaphylaxis. That is a type of hypersensitivity reaction that the three leukotriene molecules C4, D4 and E4, they do account for this sort of inflammation, and hence they are called as slow reacting substances of anaphylaxis. What do you mean by this terminology? So it is the terminology which accounts for the hypersensitivity reactions. Once there is a release of these leukotrienes, the patient is going to develop bronchospasms, increased capillary permeability and the vascular permeability, and there is a capillary dilatation of the small capillaries, and it leads to totally asthmatic like picture. accounting for the causation of bronchial asthma, which is mediated by leukotriene C4, D4 and E4. So these are some of the functions or the biological actions of leukotrienes. Coming to the applied aspects. Sometimes even though it is a rare, still it was found that patient who was on long-term prophylaxis for aspirin for certain cardiac issue. This patients suddenly come with respiratory arrest. They do come with a severe bronchoconstriction that we call it as aspirin-induced bronchial asthma. Why do they do this? We know that the aspirin is inhibiting cyclooxygenase pathway. It has nothing to do with the causation of asthma here. But why? What is the pathology that is involved here? Upon prolonged usage of this aspirin, the cyclooxygenase pathway gets inhibited and it's going to promote the lipoxygenase pathway. It's going to stimulate it 1,000 times more. It's going to promote lipoxygenase pathway. It's going to promote more and more production of leukotrienes, C4, D4, E4. They are called as slow reacting substances of anaphylaxis. That's the bringing out the severe bronchoconstriction, accounting for the causation of bronchial asthma. So any patient who is on long-term treatment with aspirin suddenly comes out with the difficulty in the breathing and increase in the respiratory rate, that's called tachypnea, then please do look for this kind of complication. Next, the other drug called Gilutin, it is into the research trial for the ulcerative colitis. Let us not go into the details of that. Now the other important compounds or the molecules that are left are lipoxins. I said you that leukotrienes and lipoxins, they both are synthesized by lipoxygenase pathway. And commonly the lipoxins are again synthesized from leukotriene. And to put it in a simpler term, lipoxygenase and leukotrienes both are the precursors for lipoxin production. If you look at the pathway, I told you initial step arachidonic acid release is common for all eicosanoids. This arachidonic acid gets converted to 5-hydroperoxy icosa tetraenoic acid upon lipoxygenase pathway. Upon removal of this hydroxy icosa tetraenoic acid, it is going to produce something called LTA that we have already seen in the previous slide. That is LTA. This LTA4 via 5-lipoxygenase pathway, it's going to give rise to lipoxin A4. Further, it undergoes lipoxygenase pathway, matlab incorporation of oxygen molecule into this leukotriene A4, giving rise to lipoxin A4. That's all. Now here the other pathway which is also giving rise to synthesis of lipoxins are the 15-HPETE, that is hydroperoxy icosa tetraenoic acid. With the help of peroxidase enzyme, it releases back hydroxy icosa tetraenoic acid by incorporating the peroxide molecule into this substrate. With the help of 5-lipoxygenase gives rise to lipoxin A4. So these are the two different pathways for the synthesis of lipoxin A4. One is directly from the leukotriene A4, the other is via the production of hydroperoxy icosa tetraenoic acid. So this is about the lipoxins, and again they are discovered in the leukocytes, and the important function of lipoxins is that they are anti-inflammatory and they are going to decrease the immune response. They are having little bit opposite effect compared to that of leukotrienes, which are going to mediate the inflammatory reaction, but here the lipoxins are anti-inflammatory in nature. So any doubts you can please text me or WhatsApp me. Thank you.